Artful Felicitations by Darusha Wehm. Are you awake? Benir's voice was low, but Shara could feel him prodding her from the hammock slung below her own. That better not be the butt of that comically oversized energy weapon you're poking me with, Benir, she replied. And you're lucky I wasn't asleep. He ignored the unveiled threat in her words. Does it not make you feel strange, hurtling through the firmament as if like a star, with nothing but this thin metal sheet between you and the void of night? She peered over the edge of her hammock to see his large, scarred hand reach out to trail against the bulkhead. His touch was light, gentle as a caress. He was always sentimental when they found themselves in a world with interplanetary travel. Shara sighed. It's no different than a sailing ship keeping you from the depths of the sea. At least in space, there are no swells to heave the vessel. A muffled groan came from the corner of the small room they'd commandeered on the starfreighter. Don't look at me, Shara said, going back to her rope work. Tying her family's decorative knot calmed her mind and kept her hands busy. She threaded the bitter end under a loop, pulling it tight. I'm off watch. Her comrade in arms of 2 decades unstrapped from his hammock and pushed off against the bulkhead, rolling and twisting his body until he was floating upright, then engaging the maglocks on his boots to connect with the floor. His movements were smooth and fluid, age not yet taking a toll on his limber body. This body, the one he'd inhabited on their return to this world, knew weightlessness. Shara was always surprised by the uncanny knowledge the hides imparted. Those bodies that looked like her, but were not her. Not quite. At least not when she was elsewhere. She'd learned about how wayfarers entered and left hides, gaining at least a little local knowledge on entry, but she'd never really understood the whole process, no matter how many times she'd done it. She tried not to think about the lives her bodies lived when she did not inhabit them. She'd seen the shells left behind when other wayfarers traveled, the shallow selves they became. As Benir had always counseled her, it was best not to dwell on such things. He clumped to the corner and the source of the noise and growled. What? He demanded. Who are you people? A meek voice said. You don't get to ask me questions, boy, Benir said. Leave it, Shara said. We are here to ensure this prisoner does not evade the justice of his people. Tormenting is not required. Who was tormenting whom? Benir asked, thrusting his face in toward the much smaller, bespectacled man securely bound in a sleep hammock. This one has been bleating non-stop since we apprehended him. See here, who we are is irrelevant. What matters to you is that we will be delivering you to the duly appointed arbiters of law from your society, to answer for the crimes of which you've been accused. The prisoner opened his mouth to speak, but Benir put a meaty finger to the man's lips, and he was silent. I am uninterested in your protestations of innocence or explanations for your actions. I am not your confessor, nor your judge. I am your minder. It has been a long, arduous journey on many ships sailing through the stars to stop at constructed cities hanging in the sky above worlds. We have been on a long path to find you, Kai Van Collier, and now that path has reached its end. Van Collier stammered. I'm not important. I'm just an accountant. Benir shrugged. Your people tell a different story, and the tale for our hunt for you is as wide as an alien sky and just as varied. It has been a worthy adventure, but I'm afraid all stories end, and this is the final chapter for you. You aren't here to kill me. It was a statement that felt like a question. Not this time, boy. Benir double-checked the restraints, then slowly marched back to his hammock, disengaging the mags and pulling himself gracefully into the sack. Shara tucked her knotwork into a pocket of her ship suit when a dim glow emanated from a screen embedded in the bulkhead. She leaned over, and her body knew to tap and swipe quickly through the menus to find the source of the notification, a message from Ops. The captain wants to see the prisoner, she told Benir. At our earliest convenience, she quoted from the message. Benir grunted. She'll darken our doorway any moment now, then, I expect. As he'd predicted, the door chime sounded. He extricated himself from the hammock and pressed on the lock. The door slid open silently, and Captain Lita Supek floated outside, a hand gripping the nearby rail. Her white hair was loose and hovered around her head like a storm cloud. We'll be reaching Jupiter Station in a few hours, she told them. I need to debrief Van Collier before he's transferred. Of course, Shara said, having escaped her own hammock and engaged the mags while Benir dealt with the door. Her local body was less well-versed in the minutiae of weightless motion than her partner's, and she found the process awkward. We will need to accompany our charge, you understand. The captain nodded once. her severe face betraying nothing. "And you understand that my questions relate to privileged information. This snake had access to the ship's manifest and transaction history, details which would most certainly be of interest to our competitors. I can allow you to remain in the room, but I will insist on a screen of silence." Shara glanced at Bainir, whose face remained impassive to all who did not know him well. Shara recognized the twitch of his left eyebrow, indicating that this was not a fight he deemed worthy of their time. "That is acceptable," Shara said to the captain, who nodded once, then propelled herself forward into the room. Her momentum carried her all the way to the corner, where Van Collier was strapped and the prisoner flinched as she neared his position, reaching up lazily to grasp a handhold. With her free hand, she tapped on her wrist console, and a shimmer appeared behind her. Shara saw the captain's lip move, her speech looking angry and her body tense, but there was no sound that reached her. "I don't know what she thinks she'll get out of him," Bainir said. "He's already been caught. She has no leverage." "Maybe it's not about information," Shara said, watching the silent scene unfold on the other side of the room. The fear on the prisoner's face, the controlled rage on the captain's. Maybe she simply needs to shout at him for a while. Van Collier had apparently boarded the freighter Artful Felicitations under forged papers, passing him off as a licensed freelance cargo chief. What he'd really been doing aboard the ship, Shara didn't know. Espionage seemed likely, given the charges laid against him. The warrant stated he had ties with the criminal society for Mare. He might have simply been looking for a free ride. Either way, the captain was less than pleased to have been deceived, and she appeared to be translating every mote of vexation into words. Words which were lost to the privacy shield separating her and the object of her wrath from the two mercenaries. "I admit to being well pleased to not have earned Captain Supek's ire," Bainir said after a few moments of watching her tear into Van Collier. "Good thing we're leaving soon, then," Shara said with an ill-concealed smirk. "Never takes you long to get under the skin of an authority." Bainir grunted. "Not all authorities," he protested. "I've yet to meet a Sibyl who was bothered." "Other of Tala notwithstanding," Shara said, "I do believe the longest we ever lasted on a world before you didn't offend, annoy, or otherwise inconvenience the person in power was, what, a week? A 10-day? We only ever had to stay that long in locales where the authorities provided more hindrance than aid." Shara looked at him sidelong. "And those petty functionaries make my beard itch." Shara laughed. The sound cut off as the privacy screen dissipated and Captain Supek propelled herself toward them in the door. "I will be glad to see the back of that one," she said, jerking her head toward the prisoner. "Please inform my second if there are any arrangements we can make to assist you in an expedient transfer." "We shall," Shara said. "I understand that the Colony Herod's Judicial Apprehension Team will be awaiting our arrival at Jupiter Station." "Very well," the captain said, stabbing the door lock with much more force than necessary. "You may follow the docking procedure from here." She gestured at a blank spot on the wall, and Shara cocked a head in confusion. The captain blinked once, then tapped on her wrist console. A semicircular section of the wall appeared to melt, revealing a small port offering a view of the cosmos outside the ship. The captain pulled herself into the passageway without another word, the door sliding closed behind her. Shara turned to see Bainir with his face pressed to the window, hands on either side of the aperture. "Of all the sagas of all the worlds," he whispered, staring out. "It's breathtaking." Bainir never tired of seeing space from within, rather than looking up from a planet or moon. His gruff manner evaporated at the sight of stars, seen clear without an atmosphere to tame them, and his awe for an approaching planet seemed to only increase with the number of times he beheld the experience. Shara bit back a caustic remark, letting him have the moment. She gathered up her things from the pockets and nets of the hammock, allowing herself a moment of nostalgia for the fishing village where she had grown up, the life of a net maker she had abandoned in favor of becoming a wayfarer, a traveler, a roamer of Tala. Memories, but not regrets. Never that, not even in her most desperate hours. Bainir stayed at the port until the ship docked at the ring encircling the orbital station. He'd never unpacked his few belongings, as was his custom, so he was ready to go once the heavy clamps juddered the ship as they connected. He slung his pack on his back and joined Shara at the prisoner. He trained the comically oversized energy weapon on Van Collier as Shara released his bonds and trapped his wrists in magnetic restraints. "Surely this isn't necessary," Van Collier complained as she added a set of restraints to his ankles. "Where would I run to?" "Not my concern," Shara said. "What is my concern is ensuring that you were delivered to Colony Herod's apprehension team without incident." She engaged the locking mechanism with a snick. Bainir gestured to the door with the lowered muzzle of his weapon, and Shara gripped the small man's upper arm firmly. He winced at her touch. but she didn't relent as she led him to the corridor. Captain Supek was waiting at the lock to see them off, perhaps wanting confirmation of Van Collier's departure. She said nothing to the three of them as they stepped into the cold of the docking ring, the artificial near-Earth standard gravity making Shara's stomach lurch. It wasn't as bad as being on a boat, at least. A team of 4 people in generic ship suits were waiting, and the obvious leader stepped toward them, holding out a chunky tablet. Shara held her own hand tabbed toward it, and it chirped with a confirmation. A digital handshake, indicating that the bearer was a duly authorized representative of the contractee for this job. Van Collier had begun to shake, his head bowed and shoulders slumped as Shara shoved him roughly toward 2 of the burly team members. He made a small squeaking noise as they wrapped their own hands around his thin arms. "We won't be needing those," the team leader said, gesturing to the restraints which were keyed to a code only Shara knew. Shara glanced at her hand tab and raised an eyebrow. "I'll remove them when we get paid." The team leader's mouth twitched, then they nodded, tapping quickly. Another confirmation chirp sounded, and Shara smiled. "Nice working with you," she said to them, then bent to unlock and remove the restraints. She noticed that Van Collier's shaking had stopped, his posture looser than she'd seen it since they caught up with him on the Artful. Her fingers grazed his wrist, and his pulse was slow and even. Baynier kept his weapon trained on them as Shara checked the balance on their account, then quickly made a series of transfers. It paid to be suspicious in their business. The 5 people across from them turned, Van Collier flanked by the 4 goons, and walked away. Odd that none of the officers bothered to restrain Van Collier as they disappeared into the bustle of the station proper. Baynier and Shara found the closest equivalent to a tavern, and used some of their hard-earned credits on a shared meal and some of the local effervescent drink. "Did you ever encounter the blue scaly acid beast on Hethebedra?" Shara asked, idly as they waited for their food. "The giant one with the razor tail? Sure." The monsters on the Abtala training world of Hethebedra were familiar to all recruits. "Something about this business reminds me of that," Shara went on. "That beast was confounding," Baynier said. "Terrible to behold, and yet docile as a pup. I marched right past it in the end." "Indeed," Shara agreed. "It was not as it appeared." Their food arrived, and Baynier dipped a large spoon into the stew, eating thoughtfully for a moment. "You think something here is off?" he asked eventually, breaking a chunk of dark bread into the fragrant stew. "Quite," Shara said, tapping on her tab. "Well, what do you know?" She held the screen up for Baynier to see, a listing of officials in the Colony Hérote Service Judiciaire. It was a small settlement on a small world, and there were images of the staff. None of the team they'd just encountered were there. "Don't tell me." Shara shook her head, pulling up their contract and showing her partner that it had been marked complete. "We weren't really hired by the colony," Baynier said. "We were not." "And that wasn't really a prisoner transfer." "It was not." Baynier took a huge bite of the stew, chewed thoughtfully. "Just an accountant, eh?" Shara shrugged. "Fermari takes their business seriously. An accountant might be a rather important person, after all. And what better way to rescue a fugitive than by apprehending them?" "But why the false contract?" Baynier asked, clearly annoyed. "We've held our noses and taken coin from those scoundrels before." "As intermediaries only," Shara reminded him. "If you'd known we were being asked to liberate a wanted criminal, would you have agreed to this job?" Baynier grunted and aggressively speared a glob of protein isolate in the stew. Shara pursed her lips. "Exactly. I'd have turned them down if I'd known also. But we didn't. Besides, their money spends as well as anyone else's." Baynier rubbed a hand over his face. "It's done now, in any case." "It is at that," Shara agreed, then took a sip of the neon green brew. It was sweet and vaguely salty, and she decided she liked it. Makes for a good tale in the end. Baynier took a moment, then grinned and lifted his glass. "What would you say to writing a better tale?" Baynier. "For the sagas, Shara." Shara gazed over the crowd in the tavern and out into the orbital station, a city-state easily large enough for a person to disappear. Finding someone here would be challenging, probably dangerous, especially someone who was back within the protection of his criminal family. If they weren't careful, they could make a powerful enemy, and there would be no pay at the end either. Going after Van Collier now was a terrible idea. She sighed and called for another round of drink. Why not? For the sagas.
You've just listened to Artful Felicitations by Darusha Wehm. This story was read to you by the author. Darusha Wehm is the Nebula Award-nominated and Sir Julius Vogel Award-winning author of the interactive fiction game, The Martian Job, the award-winning Hamlet, Prince of Robots, and over a dozen other novels, including the Terraforming Mars tie-in, Shores of a New Horizon. They are a fifth of the Many Worlds writing team, Darkly Lem. Originally from Canada, Darusha lives in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand, after several years sailing the Pacific. To find out more about Many Worlds, check us out at manyworldsforum.com. Thank you for listening to Many Worlds.